Hello. Once upon a time, my wife and I moved across the channel to France to live in a mostly ruined mill cottage on 10 acres of streams, lakes, ponds, woods and mud. It proved to be a very interesting year, and I wrote a book about it. It's called René Me, and I hope you'll enjoy joining us on our adventures. Au revoir.
René Me by George East. Read by Eugene Fraser.
December the 20th. Midnight, and the Néhou Christmas party is in full swing. My wife is dancing to the birdie song with Christian the goat, and Mr. Morris is telling his audience of school children about the night the Yanks invaded his wardrobe. René hasn't begun his whirling dervish routine, but the night is yet young. All is as it should be at this trial run for the seasonal celebrations. But I am worried about the bar bill. Since we arrived at the village hall, the Jolly Boys Club has been drinking its way round France, and I have not bought a single round. Every time our table reaches the bottom of a bottle, another takes its place, courtesy of Big Fredo, official vintner for the evening. As he leaves to visit the open-air facilities, I follow to tackle him about the likely size of the drinks bill and, most importantly, who will be settling it. Now we stand shoulder to shoulder beside the epicerie window and solemnly observe local custom by aiming at the epicenter of the enamelled Gaulois poster. As usual, Fredo is spot on. Eventually, and as relief comes, I ask how we're to sort out the finances. I appreciate his generosity, but surely it must be my turn to buy a round. Sighing with contentment, Big Fredo turns towards me, and I see that his nickname is not entirely attributable to the size of his moustache. Shaking vigorously and casting a sympathetic glance downwards in my direction, he explains. As it is Christmas and a good time for party pieces, we will be playing the sausage game. Pressed for further details of this ancient Cotentinese ritual, he summates the basic rules. At the end of the evening, all the men at our table will line up at this very spot. As one, we will unzip, display, and compare our assets. The member of the group with the furthest to reach to the Gaulois poster will be, like the poor chap's wife, the loser, and must stump up for all bottles consumed that evening. Now I see why, in the midst of such informality, the table plan was drawn up and enforced so rigidly by Fredo. And also why it occasioned so many sly comments and asides by the women of the village. "If you like," says Fredo politely as we zip up and make our way back to the celebrations, "we can ask your wife to be the judge." "No need to bother," I reply limply. Will you take a check?" Back at our table, Fredo explains in an unnecessarily loud voice that I have offered to pay for all the drinks this evening and suggests another round. He, I note, orders a giant 2-litre bottle of farmhouse cider. I, in final and complete capitulation, call for a miniature of scotch. Some hours later, and we're nearing the end of our vigil by the big pond, determined to savour every minute of this, our first night, as proper residents of Le Pouce. For 3 years we had taken the monthly pilgrimage from our terraced house in Portsmouth to the heart of the Cherbourg Peninsula, and driven off the ferryboat, knowing we must desert our Normandy home in a few short days. Each visit had been a frenzy of activity, battling to restore the ruined farmhouse and make some impression on the even more ruined mill cottage at Le Pouce before time and funds ran out. We had slept with a cement mixer, learned the patois for excuse me, but we wanted the toilet bowl in the bathroom, not the kitchen, and experienced the full horror of employing French and British craftsmen at the same time and in the same place. We had a property in each country and felt truly at home in neither. Like a Gallic brigadoon, Le Pouce would vanish in the legendary Cotentin mists as we left. existing only in our imagination, till the moment we drove down the old car track to walk the fields, touch the trees, and pretend to live there for another heartbeat of its long history. Each night in Normandy, we would sit beside the grotto at Le Pouce, listing a dozen good reasons why we should take the final step across the Channel. The following week in England, we would invent 13 good excuses why we could or should not. For nearly 30 years, we had lived in Portsmouth, moving regularly towards the city boundary like a convict edging towards the prison wall. Finally, we had arrived within a mile of the ferry port, and both realized that it was time to make a final bid for freedom, or give up our dreams and settle for a lifetime stretch on home turf. Then, as if an impatient deity had grown weary of our timid gestures and decided to take a hand, 3 of our best brewery customers called in the same week to give us the sack. Reorganization, reshuffling, and reducing costs meant that they would not be renewing our contracts in the autumn. In shock, we sat and considered our immediate reactions and alternatives. We could start again and trawl the country, seeking new clients for my specialist talents of writing about pubs and spending a lot of time in them. We could also conduct our own cost-cutting exercise, which would require somehow living off a quarter of last year's income. This would involve selling Le Pouce to the highest bidder, but any sort of bidder would be hard to find in the current market, and 2 years is a speedy property transfer time in France. Something had to be done, and as usual, when big problems surfaced, we went down to the pub. At the end of a long session in our Portsmouth local, we took stock of our situation and our options. On the debit side, we had a terminally failing business, our minus equity figure in our Portsmouth home, an overdraft at the bank, and no pension fund or any source of regular income. On the plus side, we had Le Pouce, which was in hock to the Credit Agricole Bank for a relatively small sum, and the farmhouse building was virtually ready for habitation. Then, as we have often found, inspiration arrived with the last round. Starting on her 5th pastis, my wife observed that we could just cover our UK and foreign mortgages by renting the 2 properties out. With unassailable logic, I pointed out that this would leave us with nowhere to live on either side of the Channel. She responded swiftly that I had forgotten the tiny mill cottage at Le Pouce. It had been good enough for cows to live in for the last half-century. With a little imagination and a lot more work, it could make a comfortable, if basic home while we sorted ourselves out. We could simply reverse our situation and base ourselves in Normandy, a move we had endlessly discussed and rejected. Then we could return each month, like latter-day Vikings, to raid and pillage any pub publicity business in England and virtually live off the land at Le Pouce in between times. There was more than enough room to grow vegetables and graze sheep, pigs, ducks, and every other creature below us in the food chain. Also, how often had we considered and devised foolproof schemes for making money out of our property in France and its proximity to England? Were we not a nation of explorers, entrepreneurs, and traders? It was time to put our heritage to the test. And just think of the book I could write about our year in Normandy with René Ribet and all our other friends at Néhou. It would be an adventure beyond compare, and we would still be hedging our bets. If after a year we had not waxed fat on the fruits of the land and my fertile imagination, we would be on the spot and in a better position to sell Le Pouce and return to reclaim our home in England. At least, she concluded, we would have given it our best shot. To surrender now and meekly await certain financial disaster would be unworthy of us. It would also be an insult to all our ancestors who had set forth from Portsmouth harbour to make a new home in far remoter corners of the earth than the Cherbourg Peninsula, with hardly a sovereign in their breeches. Were we going to talk about it for another 30 years, or were we going to make the break and follow our heart's desire? As a young couple at a nearby table broke into spontaneous applause at my wife's moving address, I sat and considered the arguments for the defence. I could and probably should have pointed out that her experience of living off the land was limited to a yearly harvest of grow-bag tomatoes in the backyard of number 87 Laburnum Grove, Portsmouth, or that the closest she had come to animal husbandry was taking the dog for a walk to the local park, or that we had seen dozens of other people's schemes for survival in France go tragically wrong, or indeed that most of our immediate ancestors had limited their adventuring abroad to the odd trip on the Isle of Wight ferry. Finally, and thanks to Peter Mayle, statistics proved that there were now more British people trying to write and sell books about their adventures in France than actually lived there. But the way things were, it seemed to me that someone somewhere was trying to tell us something. The fates had rolled the dice and mischievously pushed us into a corner, and it was time to put up or shut up. I ordered another pint of Dutch courage and agreed that it would be so. We would have our year with René and take each day as it came. Above us, the big Normandy sky goes on forever, and the night is still as death. I start to tell my wife that she was right, and that I love her for it. A terrible fear for the future still grips my heart, but I would rather be here with her at this moment than anywhere else in the world. I reach towards her, but she stays my hand and silently bids me listen. Somewhere from out in the velvet blackness, a visitor has arrived. A crackle of breaking undergrowth is followed by a regular series of low, breathless grunts. Donella turns to me, her face alight with joy. "There," she says, in a voice trembling with emotion. "I told you we had a badger. Now will you believe me?" I smile and nod and take her hand. I have heard that sound before and know it is René trying to restart his moped after falling into the roadside hedge. Unlike him, sound travels best at night, and the Christmas party at Néhou must finally have ended. I shiver and suggest we return to the mill, lest we scare the badgers away and spoil a perfect day.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that chapter of René and Me, and that you'll join us again for the next one. See you soon.
René and Me. Written by George East and read by Eugene Fraser.